One of my favorite t-shirts I've ever seen at a conference said, "I'm not aging, I'm fermenting." I'm John Moody, and today we want to talk about my favorite way to preserve food, fermentation. Fermentation is nature's original food preservation technique. Sometime in our past, somebody added something to a liquid medium and noticed a few days later that the food inside was still okay. They didn't know why, couldn't understand it. Sometimes they noticed the food inside was more than okay. Things like honey became mead, things like grains became beers, things like milk became yogurt. And so somebody at some point noticed that some kind of magic happens to certain foods under the right time and temperature and other conditions, and they're edible long after they normally would be. And that's the magic of fermentation. It's built right into nature. And all you have to do is learn to work with nature to make it happen. Fermentation generally follows a simple process, where a food's pH is lowered by the action of bacteria and other microorganisms. And these good microorganisms, these good bacteria, these good funguses, these good yeasts, these good molds, then make the food safe from invasions by unsafe microorganisms, dangerous bacteria, dangerous yeast, dangerous molds, dangerous fungi. And so, in nature, good microorganisms vastly outnumber bad microorganisms, at least in healthy ecological and biological systems. So the good guys are more numerous than the bad guys. In fermentation, our goal is to harness the good guys and deploy them in a way that ensures that their numbers will completely overwhelm and drive out the bad guys, so that so few are left or none are left, so that things are now safe for our family. So you might be asking why fermentation is one of my favorite ways to preserve food. There's a few different reasons. The first one is fermentation is one of the few food preservation techniques that increases the nutritional value of food. That's right. Most of the other techniques we're going to talk about actually decrease the nutritional value of the food, so that the value it has when you start and the value it has when you finally consume it, you're going all downhill from when you preserve it. Now I'm going to talk about that's not a bad thing. There's things you can do to minimize that loss, and there's just a realization that, again, as I talked about in the previous video, why to preserve food, because you're going to be preserving your own foods, hopefully, or other high quality, locally grown, organically grown, sustainably grown foods. You're still going to be getting far more nutrition than anything you're going to find in the grocery store. But fermentation is special because it is one of the few things that takes your food and makes it more nutritious. Second reason I really like fermentation is it is a very low energy, low impact operation. So a lot of other food preservation techniques, they require specialized equipment. They require using a great deal of energy. They require storage or other things that some of us don't have access to, or you think about think about having food frozen. Now you have yet another appliance to worry about when the grid goes down, when you lose power in the heat of the summer. The door got left open by a small child on the deep freeze. All these other methods of food preservation, they have a lot of benefits, but they also have some significant drawbacks, especially in terms of preparedness and self-sustainability. And so fermentation just doesn't have a lot of these upfront costs and a lot of these challenges that other methods have. It's just a real simple method. All you really need to ferment successfully is some glass vessels, ball mason jars, which pretty much everybody has or everybody can get their hands on, good quality clean water, salt, and some basic recipes, and you can get experimenting with fermentation. And again, when you ferment, you're going to end up with something that's even more nutritious And oftentimes, especially once you get used to the flavor profile of fermented foods, foods like zucchinis and cucumbers that you turn into pickles, cucumber doesn't have much flavor. It's basically like eating water. But when you ferment cucumbers into pickles, you now have something that has like not just a lot of nutritional value, but it also has a lot of flavor, which is really nice because, another drawback to a lot of other food preservation methods like canning is at the end of the method, you've really lost a lot of the flavor along with losing some of the nutrition, because those two things kind of go together. So fermentation is great. Fermentation is something that every single culture in world history has done. A lot of the foods you might be enjoying tonight, as you watch this video. Have you ever had ketchup? Well, ketchup originally was fermented fish sauce that they added tomatoes to. Mustard, fermented. We already mentioned pickles. Sauerkraut, another fermented food. Cheese is a fermented food. Yogurt is a fermented food. A lot of our staple pantry items that we all currently enjoy were originally fermented foods, but they were traditionally fermented. In fermentation, let's be clear what kind of fermentation we're talking about. We're not just talking about a vinegar brine. So we're not talking about artificially lowering the pH of a food just by adding a bunch of acidic vinegar to bring the pH down artificially. Fermentation is a natural process where a type of bacteria, usually known as lactobacteria, are kind of the big genus of bacteria that do the heavy lifting in this process. They consume things in the fermenting vessel, and as they consume them, they naturally secrete acids and other chemicals that lower the pH while they increase and multiply their numbers. And so that's the kind of fermentation we're aiming for, a traditional fermentation that's been practiced by people all over the world for thousands and thousands of years. So as I mentioned, to ferment, you really only need 4 things to get started. One of them is exceptionally important, and that is a source of good, clean, non-chlorinated water. Chlorine is an antibacterial agent. It's added to water supplies to keep them clean and sanitary. It is the predominant method in the United States still to sanitize water and disinfect water. If you're lucky, some major cities in the United States have moved to UV and other methods of water sanitation and disinfection. But still, most likely, most of us, if you're on grid-based water supplies, centralized water, you're going to be getting chlorinated, fluorinated water. And since the goal of fermentation is to use bacteria to preserve food, and chlorine in our water supplies goal is to kill bacteria to make the water potable and safe to drink, you're going to be butting heads if you try and do fermentation and you're using any kind of standard chlorinated treated water. So you have to have a good, clean source of water to use for fermentation. Maybe that involves getting a water filter on your house. Maybe that involves buying a good quality spring water. Just depends on what works in your situation. But don't waste your time fermenting until you've lined up a good, suitable source of water to use in the fermenting process. Next thing you need is a good quality salt. Salt is one of those things that if you don't have a 50-pound bag as part of your preparedness or a 25-pound bag, you really should, because salt has so many different uses in terms of, not just food preservation, but also in terms of, for dehydration and making, a rehydration solution. It's great for treating certain types of wounds if you're lacking other medical options. There's just so many beneficial and good uses for salt, along with making food more palatable. This is why Samwise Gamgee, as he traveled all the way from the Shire to Mordor, one of the few things he kept with him is some salt and some herbs, because those things make food so much better, no matter what situation you find yourself in. And so you need a good quality salt though. I would not do a typical store-bought iodized salt, though some people do report a lot of success with that. I'm a really big fan of something like a Redmond salt or a Himalayan salt or some kind of other high quality salt to use in my fermentation. So you need water, you need salt, you need good quality fresh produce. And by good quality, we really want produce, if at all possible, that is grown without lots of herbicides, without lots of pesticides, without lots of other chemical inputs. Because those chemical inputs alter and damage the bacterial community that surrounds those vegetables. And it's the bacterial community on the vegetable as it's pulled out of the ground that's the kickstarter, the inoculant, that kind of runs the engine of fermentation. So when you want to ferment carrots, when you want to ferment all these other different types of produce, you really want them to be properly raised and well raised, because you're going to get you're going to have a much higher success rate. You're going to have much better tasting fermented preserved foods this way, and the process is just going to go a lot better, be a lot more successful. This also reminds me to mention that with the produce you're getting, you want to make sure you don't treat it with sanitizing agents. So produce we pull, we test our well water, usually once or twice a year to make sure our well water shows no bacterial contamination. We pull vegetables from the ground, we rinse them thoroughly with our well water just to get dirt and other stuff off, but that water rinse ain't gonna remove the bacteria. And then we have really great produce to start with. But if you pull that produce and you take it in your house, and they sell all of these sprays and other things now that you can spray on produce, those are going to really mess with your success in terms of fermentation. So you want clean water, you want good, clean, high quality produce, you want a good, clean, high quality salt, and then you need some kind of vessel to ferment in. Again, it can be glass jars, it can be fermenting crocks. There are a ton of different options for what you can use for fermenting in, but it's as simple as starting out with a ball mason jar. So that's what we started with many years ago, and that's what you can start with too. So I want to take a minute to talk about gizmos and gadgets that can help make your fermentation more successful. So there is no end to the number of items you can purchase to make your fermentation more successful, make it go easier, make your results more consistent. Everything from buying inoculants that you can use in fermentation, to buying airlocks and all sorts of other gadgets and gizmos to make the process go smoother and better. In our experience, there's a few different items we have found that are worth the investment and really do contribute to our success in consistently making really high quality, good tasting, shelf stable fermentation products for fermented foods. So the first one of those are what are known as WEC canning jars. So these are one of the drawbacks to ball mason jars is it's a beautiful all glass jar, but it has a metal lid and metal rim that attaches to the jar. And the problem with those we found is when you're fermenting with those, especially if you're fermenting something and then you're going to try storing it for an extended period of time. Remember, we talked about fermentation as a process that lowers pH, makes the food far more acidic, and that acidity we found sometimes will begin to eat away at the lid, and that's just gross. So we've had times where you pop open a ferment and you pop open the fermented food and you'll find little flakes of the ball lid having flaked down into the fermented food. And that doesn't strike us as safe. That didn't strike us as a really good thing. You can use, so for ball jars, we switched over for our ferments to using Tattler lids with our ball jars, both for canning and for fermenting. The Tattler lids are BPA free and they're all plastic. And they come with then like a silicone seal ring. So there's no metal involved anymore. But moving a step up from doing ball mason jars with Tattler lids, now we do WEC jars, which is a glass jar, beautiful glass lid, and then they have these little metal sealing clips, and again a silicone ring to make the seal, make the one-way airlock as you're heat processing them if you're using them on the canning side of the equation. And we have just absolutely loved the results we've gotten out of the WEC jars. They do sell fermenting crocks, especially for making larger batches. There's a couple companies I think now out of Ohio who make larger stoneware fermenting crocks. And what really makes a fermenting crock special isn't just its size, but it's the weighted stone lid that creates the air seal for you during fermentation. And this is really important. During fermentation, especially a lot of lacto fermentation, not all types of lacto fermentation, that we can talk about maybe in another video, making kombucha, making kefir. But in terms of lacto fermenting vegetables, you want to deny air exchange. So these stones that weigh down the vegetables and keep them submerged under the brining liquid, and that's what, the salt plus water, that's a brine. So this salt plus water mixture, this brining liquid that we ferment inside of, that creates this perfect environment for fermentation to take place, is interrupted by air exchange. And the more air exchange you have, the more likely your ferment will have issues with unwanted microorganisms finding a foothold before the pH is dropped low enough to make it so that they can't find a good place to take up residence and ruin your ferment. So another item we use that we've really, really liked are some of these fermenting airlocks we've tried. Those are really nice as well for making that one direction, carbon dioxide and other gases that the bacteria are releasing can escape, but air can't get back in. And a new item we're going to be trying out this season, we just got from a company called Mason Tops. They make a specialized glass stone kit for use with weighting, fermenting in ball jars. So we're going to be trying those out, and probably this fall, I'll give everybody an update on what we thought of Mason Tops items. So sky's the limits out there in terms of the number of products now available to make fermentation more successful. Those are a few of the things we've learned over the years. We really like ball mason jars with Tatler lids. We really, really like WEC's all glass jars and their seal and ring system for making a wide variety of ferments successfully. So at this point, you might be wondering, well, what if I was going to ferment for the first time, John, what would I ferment? What would I do? So let me tell you the three things I think are the easiest ferments to start with. And the first one is garlic scapes. And it's a great time of year because in most of the country, if you have garlic or have access to garlic, scapes are going to be coming into season. And they're the stem that grows out of the center of certain garlic varieties, where you get the flower from. And the scapes are delicious. So a lot of local farmers now actually sell them because people realize the scapes are edible, not just the bulb at the bottom. And while we like the scapes fresh, they are absolutely fabulous fermented. And so you can harvest the scapes. We run them through a food processor. We pack them, really tightly in a jar with a little bit of brining liquid, seal the jar, let it sit on the counter, anywhere from 3 to 5 days to let it, get fermenting. You'll know it's good and fermented because it'll start forming carbon dioxide bubbles. Some of the brining liquid will get pushed out of the seal. And now you have fermented garlic scapes, and they can go into the freezer, or not freezer, into your refrigerator. They can go in your fridge, and they will last, in our experience, fermented garlic scapes will last 2-3 years in the refrigerator. Or if you have a really, really cold root cellar, an area where you can keep them that's going to hover, down around, 38 degrees, 40 degrees. They have a really great shelf life, and they're just fantastically delicious and a wonderful substitute for garlic in all sorts of cooking and other applications. So garlic scapes, one really easy ferment for you to try out. We found it to be really foolproof. Another one we really like is a ferment called ginger carrots. The original recipe we use is found in Sally Fallon's cookbook, Nourishing Traditions. That's actually the cookbook that got us started fermenting in the first place. So ginger carrots are basically, good quality carrots, once again ran through a food processor. You also add in some good quality ginger. There's a few other things you can add or not add, and then you add the brining liquid, and they make this just really delicious, very easy to make fermented carrot item. So that's another one we do. We'll often make our own fermented ketchup. We skip the fish sauce. We just haven't been able to go that far quite yet. So we do a traditional fermented ketchup, sans the fish sauce. And maybe I'll have my wife write up that recipe, and they'll put it, they can post it on the site to go along with this video so you can see our recipe for making fermented ketchup. That's a real fun one that we do. Really, really easy, great deal of success, and then you're not buying store-bought ketchup that has so many of the fillers and additives and other things in it that modern ketchup tends to be. And then the final one is, turning cucumbers into pickles. That's another, really easy, kind of doesn't require a lot of effort, and we found to be pretty bomb-proof ferment to start with in terms of your fermenting options. So, kick those 4 around, see if you can do any of them, let us know how your results go. There's some other things that you can surprisingly ferment, a few other vegetables out there that a lot of people don't think about fermenting, but things like your green beans, if you're running near the end of the season and you're just flooded with green beans, you can make what are known as dilly beans, which are fermented green beans that then you can cook, or you can eat, now in their fermented state, kind of like a condiment. Use them more like a pickle, and some other fermented vegetables. So those are just, sky's the limit with fermentation. Some good resources if you're looking to kind of go after this area this year. Some books I would recommend are the books by a guy by the name of Sander Katz, a book called Wild Fermentation, and I think he probably at this point has a few other books. And then my friend Alex Lewin also has a number of books on fermentation. So either Sander's books or Alex Lewin's books, both of them will treat you right and will help you get up to fermenting speed